Today I'm going to dive into a topic that brings me a lot of questions as a coach, and that is the topic of metrics and what these abbreviations and numbers all mean that are floating around your training plan. So my goal today is to dive in, introduce you to some of the more fundamental, foundational metrics, explain what they are, put them in context, and make them meaningful to you so you can look at your training plan and say, oh, okay, I know what that means. I can somewhat use this, or I can use this alongside with my coach, and I can get more specific with my training. So let's dive in to what I want to get into today. So two factors kind of underlie all of the metrics that I'm going to discuss today, and those are intensity and duration. And this is basic physiology, right? So the harder you do something for longer, the more stressful it'll be. And training in endurance sports is all about managing and progressing your tolerance to stress and to load. So we can play with these two things, with the intensity and the duration, to stress our bodies, adapt, recover, do it all again and again and again until we get fitter, faster, stronger. Of the two, duration is obviously very easy to reckon with. It's time. Intensity is a little harder to define, and so that's where we're going to spend a lot of our time today, is discussing what the heck it is, how we measure it, and then build from it. It's the first piece of this whole puzzle. So we have to start with a benchmark or a measuring stick, a yardstick of some sort, so that we can hold intensity up against some sort of a standard. Our day-to-day workouts have to be held up to some sort of benchmark. Otherwise, we have no idea or no way to measure intensity. And what we use to do this, the benchmark that we use, is threshold effort, or functional threshold power if you have a power meter, or lactic threshold heart rate or pace. It can be any of these things, but it's loosely defined as your 1 hour pace or effort, like what you could do in a time trial, best effort over 1 hour in any of these sports. Now, yeah, we can have some wiggle on that definition, but for all intents and purposes, that 1 hour power is what most people go off of. And we don't always test with a 1 hour effort because it's brutal. So there are tests that are shorter that we can use to estimate, and I discuss those elsewhere. But we use this threshold data, whether it's power, heart rate, pace, to help us determine and lay a foundation for measuring intensity. And once we have it, it can allow us to set our zones and establish good pacing. So we have functional threshold power, or lactic threshold heart rate or pace. Now we are going to hold our workouts up against it. And one of the weak spots of using a pure average, like if you added everything together and divided it by the number of entries, is that that's not how our bodies work. We get a bigger cost when we surge or we push up a hill, and we sometimes take complete zeros if we're like coasting down a hill on the bike, and that can wildly affect a standard average. So we use mathematics and some fun formulas to normalize our curves, to give better weight to the hard efforts and less weight to the zeros, so that we have a better representation of our effort for the whole workout. And what this normalized power or graded pace is basically what it would have been if you held the same effort for the whole ride, or if you ran on a flat course for the whole thing. It flattens it, it normalizes it. And this is a better number, especially outside, because there's so many variables in that. So we take this, instead of average power, average pace, we'll take normalized pace or normalized power and hold that up against our threshold. And that gives us a percentage that we call intensity factor. And it's really, truly just a measure of how hard things were relative to our threshold. So we read it as a percentage, even though you'll see it as a number like 1.0 or 0.75 in TrainingPeaks. It's a percentage of our threshold. And below our threshold, we're trying to get a sense for how long we can work at a certain effort. And if 1.0 is our max for an hour. It's a steady state, right? And everything else under it is steady state. Everything above it is anaerobic and very limited in what we can do. We're just grading down the intensity and increasing the duration in which we can hold these efforts. Hopefully you're starting to see what I'm getting at here. So by knowing what our intensity is at, we can start playing with the time and we can start playing with the stress. So once we have intensity factor, the percentage of threshold that we're working at for our workout, now we can add in time. That was the easy piece. So we add in time into a formula that kicks out a value called training stress score. And very simply, it is kind of like multiplying intensity and duration, but there's a little bit more to the formula. But basically, it takes both variables into account and gives us a more complete view, not just of how intense the workout was, but how stressful it was completely. And then we can take this and we can put it into the context of your overall training, which I'll explain in a minute. And we use training stress score to get a sense for how tired and how tiring that workout was, how tired you are and how tiring that workout was, and also to manage performance with tools like the performance management chart to know how high we're going to take our stress, when we're going to recover, how fresh we're going to be for race day. So let's dive into that. So training stress score is a biggie, and it's one you'll see in every workout. Training stress score then plays into these numbers that you're going to see on your dashboard a lot. And these are ones I get asked about all the time. And these three are the components of your performance management chart. The biggie is CTL, chronic training load, or your fitness. The higher we take this number, basically the higher your rolling average of daily training stress score is. So the higher that number, the more total cumulative chronic stress you've built up and can manage as an athlete. And it's when you get this built up that some workouts that used to be hard start to feel a lot easier. And then you have to add more load to keep progressing. So chronic training load is this big picture, 42-day, of what you've done and how much you've built up. Acute training load is shorter. It's the 7-day window, the 1-week window back to show how hard you've been training recently. And that gives us a sense of how deep you're digging. And we can put those two numbers together, especially in the context of injury, and see like, okay, what changed here? Or where was there too much acute load versus chronic load? And again, we can go down some rabbit holes there about the ratios you should have acute to chronic and where you should be within your abilities. But so chronic load, big picture fitness. Acute load, how hard you're working and how tired you are. Form is kind of the balance of those two and gives us a sense of how fresh you're going to be or how tired you are. So you can see here it talks about a peak performance typically falls between a plus 15 and a plus 25. And that's where we can work to taper you in and say, hey, I want to do some planning to reduce your training stress so that you're really fresh for race day. Flip that around, we can also look at how low we want that number to be as kind of a balance to your ATL and say we want that between a negative 15 and a negative 25 typically, and maybe up to negative 30, but you're pushing it a little bit. That's where we're starting to push the body and start to see some adaptation. So we can use this balance, this form number, and this fatigue number to give us some insight into how we're doing day to day, and the CTL to see how we're progressing overall. And these are powerful numbers. I use CTL a lot in determining what we're trying to aim for total fitness as we build up to an event. And then I use the other two to kind of manage day to day and see where we're falling with how we're managing our stress and recovery. So these are the big ones. If you can get your head wrapped around the training stress score related metrics with intensity factor and ATL, CTL, and TSB, you're going to cover a lot of the ones that you're going to see there. Normalized graded pace, normalized power, also super powerful. So, in a nutshell, that is metrics. Those are the basic intro metrics. I will do a deeper dive into some more involved ones in the future, but hopefully this gives you an idea of what those numbers are, what they mean, and how you can use them a little bit to gauge how you're recovering, how you're feeling, and how to progress. Let me know if you have questions. And as always, thank you for coming out.